Hey, Joe Walsh here. North Korea would not be happening if not for Trump. We'll talk about it when Freedom returns at 5.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So it's been arguably a pretty good week of foreign policy successes and promises kept, at minimum, from the Trump administration, beginning with his announcement on Tuesday that we are out of this glide path to a nuclear Iran deal. And then, of course, culminating this morning with the return of 3 American hostages from North Korea in advance of Trump's sit-down with Kim Jong-un. For more on the Iran deal and what comes next, in addition to the reimposition of sanctions, we're pleased to be joined by our friend, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and the author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Dan. Thank you.
So let me ask you something. We're talking to Bill Gertz from the Washington Free Beacon yesterday about this deal, or the removal of the U.S. from this deal, and the president's remarks directly to the Iranian people as part of his remarks. So essentially saying the revolution hasn't served you well for 40 years. I know you don't want this theocratic regime, and encouraging essentially the revolt against the Ayatollah. And Gertz thinks that the raw materials are there for a popular uprising that would depose the mullahs in the next 5 to 10 years and change the nature of Iran and thus the landscape in the Middle East. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, absolutely. And, many of us said this was not a deal to start with, let alone now that you look at the timing. I was against this deal from the beginning because we paid up front and got nothing in return. And in the end, basically gave Iran the green light to help do a genocide in Syria and be the worst actors in the region with abandon. So now, as of January 1st, the people of Iran have been rising up against their own people. And Bill is exactly right. There has been a confluence of opportunities, which is, if you look at the people marching, this revolution is even different than the one from 2009. What's different in 2009, it was really based in Tehran. It was more economic. This one is actually an anti-theocratic movement. They are marching in front of the schools of theology, the homes of the imams and the clerics that are driving the Islamic Republic. They're telling them in chants in the mosques that, we don't care about America and the West. We care about Iran, and you are deceiving us into believing that America is our problem. And that's why the Iranians just last week pushed forth an app that they want people to use on their phones, which is called the Death to America app, because they're losing the public campaign against America. So if there's anyone cheering what President Trump did in backing out, it is the people of Iran that are realizing that the Iranians are no longer going to get economic benefits from oppressing their own people, and that money that President Obama falsely told them was going to come to their own benefit of the people of Iran, they saw is actually going to help the military-industrial complex of Iran, Syria, and Russia.
How does the Death to America app work exactly?
Yeah,
does it light up your phone? Does it set it on fire? Is it like a Tesla?
It's sadly, as funny as that is, it's basically a radicalization app that connects folks that are with the regime. So the regime isn't trying to reach out to the revolution. What they're trying to do is empower that 5-10% of the population that actually agrees with their Sharia theocratic state, and they're trying to unite them to counter that revolution. So it's crazy how much they have continued to radicalize their own population.
And it's, Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, I don't know if you saw, but he tweets too, not only does President Trump, and he tweeted yesterday about President Trump that this man's corpse will be worm food. So they're not...
As most corpses are.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But, I mean, they're... and then they burn the American flag, or a picture of the American flag, during Iranian parliament. Where is this going to go from here?
Yeah, it's interesting. You see their poster on their Twitter while the leading supreme leader tweets, but he doesn't let any of his own population tweet. On the other hand, you look at Press TV, Iranian television, their state-sponsored television, and actually they're more tepid. While they are bolstering against the West and saying this is just craziness, etc., they're also trying to shore up support from Europe. They're realizing that if Europe also backs up from all the economic kleptocratic ideas they've had to start businesses in Tehran and elsewhere, we had our own Ambassador Grinnell, who within a few days of arriving in Germany told the Germans, you need to start looking at winding up operations in Tehran. And the Germans responded by saying, oh, that's offensive. He shouldn't be telling us what to do. When in fact, we finally have a president now and his ambassadors and others that are leading from the front and not leading from behind. And Europe is going to start to realize that these investments in genocidal regimes and their so-called businesses are not going to be a way to feed that monster. And I think the long term is going to be returning to a sanctions regime, starting to punish regimes like Iran and Assad and others for doing what they felt they could do with abandon over the last 8 years. And I think ultimately, like Eli Lake spoke about in Bloomberg, was that the mettle of this policy shift will be shown in Syria. If Iran can now realize, and we saw yesterday with the strikes from Israel, if they start to realize, and the strikes from Israel also show that our allies, like Israel, now know that they have their back. So they're going to see, actually, I think, much greater containment of Iran over the next year or two. And then ultimately, as Bill mentioned, I think, launching of this revolution to much bigger proportions.
Well, one of the concerns by some kind of across the political spectrum who may be not as pro-Israel as, say, I am, or one, along with Jordan, or one erstwhile ally in the Middle East, suggests, this is Israel pulling us into more conflict in the Middle East. This ratchets up the potential for an Israeli-Iranian conflict or regional war. But it seems to me that Michael Oren, we had on the show, I'm going to go through every guest we've had on the show for the last 2 weeks. Michael Oren, who we had on the show, Deputy Prime Minister of Israel last week, I thought he made an interesting point about what the Obama administration did in terms of incentivizing Arabs and Jews to come together, to work together. Obama said he was going to try and do it through the incentive for peace. Instead, he brought Arabs and Jews together through a shared concern about Iranian hegemony in the region. And I guess the question is, can that shared concern about Iranian hegemony that brought the Israelis together, at least in some cooperation with the Saudis, for example, is that a foundation on which more can be built to promote long-standing stability in the region?
I think it's definitely a step forward. Sadly, President Obama, by abandoning our Sunni allies, made them go into sort of chaos where the Jordanians, the Saudis, the Egyptians, Sunni governments saw that we became Iranophilic and were basically emboldening their enemies. And Iran was becoming more and more powerful because not only did they now have the West in their pocket, but they had Russia and China. So now what we're seeing is recalibration of the stability, and I put that in quotation marks, stability of the 20th century, where the Sunnis find that we have their back, the Saudis and Egyptians and others, and the Jordanians, and they're actually cheering. I guarantee you there's no tears being shed about the Israeli rockets, no matter how anti-Israel the Jordanians or Saudis are. They've been talking to the Israelis. They like to see pushback against the Hezbollah threat on the northern border there. So I guarantee you they're happy about this. Now, me, as an advocate of the Arab awakening, I hope this is one step forward, but yet ultimately in the next 10, 20 years, just as I advocate for the Iranian revolution, I don't want to see a Middle East where we continue to embolden even the Sunni dictatorships either. But sadly, Obama put us in this position where we've had to reset the stability of the various regimes in the Middle East so that we can then move forward into more domestic movements to destabilize dictatorships that don't share our values.
Are there steps that President Trump should consider taking after the imposition of sanctions takes effect and has some teeth and changes the landscape, over the next 6 months? What else should he be doing to foment that revolt in Iran?
I think ultimately now he needs to start improving. He has a new appointee to the Office of Public Diplomacy, Heather Nauert, the former Fox News anchor, who now is going to be working with Secretary Pompeo on. I think we need to start moving into offense. Just as in the Cold War, we had Radio Free Europe. we need to start looking at, and I think John Bolton and Pompeo are going to be doing this, which is the best anti-nuclear program is weakening the Iranian economy, weakening any benefits they may feel into causing trouble in the region. And I think also the metal will be seen in Syria, and to decrease the sense of benefit from them having, foreign surrogate wars as they're doing. And also, as Senator Rubio pointed out a couple times this week, he said, we have to put them on notice that if they do anything in Iraq where the Shia surrogates for Iran are attacking our allies, be they Kurds, be they the Sunni forces or others, that we will push back. So President Trump, I think, this will work because somebody like President Obama could never have done this. President Trump doesn't have red lines that he just says, oh, by the way. Secretary Mattis and others have made it clear that our red lines mean something. So I think, if they test it, we'll push back. If they don't test it, I think they won't because they know that President Trump and his administration mean what they say. Speaking of red lines, let's go to Syria. I know you have family there. You mentioned at the outset the idea that removing or walking away from this terrible Iranian nuclear deal may reset Iran's presence in Syria. But there's also word out about a pullback of funding of the White Helmets. Where is Syria from your perspective, and what should the American posture be towards the Assad regime at present? Yeah, I think, listen, I'm not harboring any illusions that there is a solution in Syria that's clear to anybody. As our families suffer, I was very disappointed, if not depressed, that we've stopped supporting the White Helmets. I think that any support to them was, in the end, the vast majority of which was humanitarian. Now, can anybody guarantee all of those guys are great actors? No, you can't, but this is one of the worst wars on the planet right now. And we need to have a side there, and that side is not on Assad, it's not on the Islam. And I think what will happen is, as Iran has to pay a higher price for creating, missile launch pads and other things in the areas against Israel, they will begin to retract, especially as the economy, becomes weaker in Tehran. They won't have the financing to do so. And I think ultimately, as we look at a Syria strategy, we have to have a long-term strategy, which is to begin to slowly work with those groups. Why not? I would say President Trump's first step should be to reestablish support of the Kurds, both in Iraq and in Syria. So not only did we back away from the White Helmet, we backed away from the Kurd support, which sent a horrible signal. So I hope he can revisit that, step back. And then once we support the Kurds, we start to support some of those groups on the ground, either covertly, overtly, that share our values, and begin to, I think, look at a Bosnian solution that we used in the 90s, which is have the UN, through a UN protection force, begin to create no-fly zones, et cetera. But that's not something we would do alone. I think once Europe wakes up to what we're trying to do in Iran, they would then do exactly like they did Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Serbia in the 90s. He is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, former U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander, and author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it. Anytime. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro